On the first dawn of a new year, a 4-star hotel in Makati was meant to be nothing more than a sealed palace of champagne, toasts, and muffled laughter. Yet behind one locked door, celebration curdled into silence. A young woman, Christine Dacera, 23, flight attendant dreamer, was carried out before noon, lips pale, breath gone. Officially, it was tragedy. Unofficially, it was chaos. Within hours, whispers spread faster than fireworks smoke. Bruises unexplained, timelines fractured, companions rehearsing stories that never aligned. The authorities promised clarity. Instead, they handed the country contradictions. What began as a night of music became a riddle scrawled across headlines and hashtags, a question that has refused to die. Was Christine lost to fate, or to something far darker, carefully hidden in plain sight? There's something unbearably quiet about a hotel corridor at 8 a.m., the kind of silence that feels staged, like the aftermath of a rehearsal gone wrong. The cameras, those ever watchful mechanical eyes, caught her last movements. Christine, 23, barefoot, moving strangely down the hallway, clutching her phone as though it weighed 10 pounds. A stewardess who had smiled at passengers thousands of times now staggered, as if the ground itself betrayed her. Hours later, she was found lifeless inside a room she had walked into willingly the night before. What really stops you cold isn't the still image of her body or the sterile photographs leaked from the investigation. It's the expressions of people around her. Friends, acquaintances, strangers, turncoat drinkers. Their stories don't line up. Their faces are rehearsed with half-belief. One says she passed out. Another swears she was still breathing at dawn. The fragments of the night are held together by nothing but contradictions. And here's the cruel irony. Christine's career was all about safety. Her uniform meant reassurance to passengers in turbulence, calm against fear. Yet in her final hours, there was no safety net, no hand reaching to stop her fall. She walked into a 4-star hotel to welcome a new year, champagne, laughter, and the illusion of togetherness. And what came out was a narrative too messy, too suspicious, too dark to be passed off as another night gone wrong. In every photograph she left behind, Christine's smile feels tainted now, like a postcard from a world that no longer exists. The headlines would later call her case a scandal, a tragedy, a cautionary tale. But underneath the noise, the hashtags, the conflicting reports, is a question that feels like an accusation. How could someone so full of life end in a silence so carefully orchestrated it resembles a performance? The scene doesn't just whisper of negligence. It reeks of ritual. The last toast, the final hug, the staged panic of those who claim they tried to save her. The deeper you stare at that hallway footage, the more it feels like Christine wasn't just lost in the night. She was swallowed by it. The Philippines in late 2020 was an exhausted country. Pandemic restrictions had frayed nerves, grounded flights, and caged its citizens in homes that felt smaller with each passing month. New Year's Eve promised an escape. Not the fireworks and sprawling street parties of the old years, but small bubbles of rebellion. Hotel rooms transformed into makeshift clubs, liquor standing in for freedom. Friends trying to convince themselves that laughter could mask the claustrophobia of a world gone wrong. In Makati City, the financial heart of Metro Manila, the landscape itself was contradictory. Towering glass skyscrapers rose above streets lined with vendors selling fish balls and knockoff phone cases. A few blocks from neon-lit bars, luxury hotels stood like sealed kingdoms, guarded by doormen in crisp uniforms. Inside one of these, a 4-star haven marketed as a retreat for the well-off and weary, a group of young professionals gathered to celebrate survival. Another year lived through lockdown, through fear, through uncertainty. Christine Dacera walked into that hotel as both participant and symbol. She was a flight attendant, someone whose job had been gutted by grounded planes and border restrictions. Airlines once paraded their staff as icons of modern glamour. Press uniforms, red lipstick, the promise of escape at 30,000 feet. Now they were idled, shuffled into temporary limbo. For Christine, the party wasn't just about champagne and music. It was about proving life could still feel normal, even for a few borrowed hours. And society was watching. Filipinos, starved of distraction, turned public tragedies into national debates faster than they could be fact-checked. Cases like Christine's would not unfold quietly in some police archive. They would be dissected on talk shows, spat across social media feeds, and turned into weapons in culture wars about morality, gender, and responsibility. In this environment, a single incident, a young woman dead after a night of celebration, could transform into something larger, a mirror reflecting both the hypocrisy and hysteria of a country always teetering between conservatism and modernity. When Christine checked into that room, she stepped into more than just a private gathering. She walked into a setting already charged with the weight of the times. Economic collapse, cabin fever, and a society desperate to assign blame. What happened between those hotel walls would never be contained there. It was destined to be pulled apart, pixel by pixel, until it no longer resembled a simple story of tragedy, but rather a battlefield where truth itself became negotiable. Christine Angelica Dacera. Even her name reads like a screenplay title, a character destined to be both adored and destroyed by the spotlight. Born in General Santos City, she carried that peculiar brightness that small towns claim as their own, the kind of person everyone points to and says, she'll go places. And she did. A pageant competitor, a choir singer, eventually a flight attendant for Philippine Airlines. She was one of those people whose face could anchor a travel brochure. Cheerful, polished, radiant with the practiced confidence of someone trained to calm strangers at 30,000 feet. But beyond the press shots and company photos, Christine was still 23, the age of contradictions. Old enough to rent a hotel suite with colleagues, young enough to still believe the world could be paused for a night of indulgence. Friends describe her as warm, easy to laugh, prone to sudden bursts of dance. She wasn't a ghost before the tragedy. She was flesh and rhythm and ambition. And yet, in every narrative of Christine's life, her profession kept reasserting itself like a recurring motif. Being a flight attendant in the Philippines wasn't just a job. It was a symbol. Families boasted about daughters who wore the uniform. They were imagined as cosmopolitan figures, constantly in transit, embodying both beauty and independence. But that glamour came with shadows. The industry was precarious. Long hours, irregular schedules, constant scrutiny from strangers, and a society eager to police the morality of women who dared to live freely. Christine straddled that tension. The respectable daughter with a high-status career and a young woman who wanted to dance at midnight, drink with friends, maybe chase away the suffocating isolation of a year marked by quarantine. Her colleagues became her surrogate family, the hotel room her temporary sanctuary. She didn't step into that party as a cautionary tale. She stepped in as someone trying to reclaim a slice of joy in a world that had denied it for months. It's almost unbearable, the hindsight. To look at photos of her grinning in uniform, to scroll past the Instagram shots of her travels, to hear her friends talk about her warmth, and to know that all of it will soon be drowned by hashtags, dissected by strangers, twisted into moral arguments. She's no longer Christine, the daughter, the singer, the colleague. She becomes Christine, the case. The cruelest transformation is this. The girl who once welcomed passengers into the sky will be dragged down into a narrative she couldn't control. The living person evaporates, leaving behind only a victim, a name, a symbol. It begins, as most tragedies do, with the illusion of normalcy. The countdown to 2021 had just finished. Glasses clinked. The room throbbed with music and the kind of drunken optimism only the new year can sell. Christine was surrounded by men she considered colleagues, acquaintances, supposed friends. They poured more drinks, joked about karaoke, made the usual small talk that drips like melted wax when a party starts to thin out. But by the early hours, the edges of the night began to warp. Witnesses recalled Christine drinking heavily, too heavily. Some said she complained of feeling dizzy, that her head hurt, that she wasn't herself. One claimed she had gone to rest in the bathtub. Another insisted she was taken to bed by a friend. Details fractured like glass under pressure. The most chilling account came later. At some point, Christine reportedly tried to call for help, a phone in her hand, a message half composed, a signal that she knew something was wrong. But the calls went unanswered, and the texts were never fully explained. Was she seeking rescue, or just reassurance? That ambiguity hangs in the air like smoke. The hotel's CCTV caught fragments. Christine walking unsteadily in the corridor, supported by companions, then disappearing back into the room. The timestamp reads like a countdown clock. By morning, she was found unconscious in the bathtub, lips turning pale, body unresponsive. They tried CPR, or so they claimed. They rushed her to hospital, but the official record was blunt. Declared dead on arrival. The disturbance isn't just a fact of her death. It's the theater of it. How does a lively, healthy 23-year-old collapse and never rise again in the middle of a supposed celebration? The faces around her told different stories, some speaking in panic, others already shaping alibis. Christine was gone, and with her, the innocence of the night evaporated. Hotels are meant to be transit spaces. You check in, you live a borrowed life, and you leave. But in that room, Christine didn't leave. What should have been a hangover became a headline. The champagne corks, the balloons, the laughter. They now feel grotesque. Stage props in the background of a crime scene. And here lies the first fractured line of the case. What happened in those missing hours when Christine slipped from a woman celebrating the new year to a body carried out under the sterile light of a hospital? The morning after was chaos disguised as procedure. Reports clashed before the ink was even dry. Some of Christine's companions claimed they found her unconscious and immediately sought help. Others insisted she was fine hours earlier, laughing, drinking, then suddenly fading. But the timelines refused to overlap neatly, like puzzle pieces from different boxes shoved together. The autopsy brought more confusion instead of clarity. The initial report listed ruptured aortic aneurysm as the cause of death, a rare condition for someone so young. The official phrasing sounded clinical, detached, final, but people didn't buy it. Netizens dissected the claim with almost forensic obsession. They asked, how does a healthy, vibrant 23-year-old with no serious medical history simply drop dead from an aneurysm during a party? Why were there bruises and marks on her body, unaccounted for in the neat medical summary? And then came the contradictions from those who were with her that night. Friends described Christine as drunk but manageable, while others hinted she had been unconscious long before help was called. There were whispers of substances, of inappropriate behavior, of betrayals hidden behind polite testimonies. The inconsistencies multiplied like fungus in the dark. The public's reaction turned the case into a spectacle. Hashtags trended. Comment sections filled with armchair detectives who alternated between grief and rage. Christine was suddenly not just a woman who died mysteriously in a hotel. She was a symbol of a culture war. Was she the victim of predatory men or the tragic casualty of her own choices? The conversation split the country in two as strangers debated the morality of a dead woman they had never met. The deeper you looked, the stranger became. One moment, authorities announced the case was closed, natural causes. The next, they shifted, suggesting possible foul play. Each press briefing felt like a performance written by different authors who never agreed on the script. Meanwhile, Christine's family begged for justice, their grief amplified through microphones and cameras. This is where the story begins to rot. Not because the truth is impossible to find, but because it becomes buried under too many versions of it. Aneurysm, intoxication, assault, negligence. Every explanation fit parts of the puzzle, but never the whole. And in that gap between official statements and public suspicion, Christine's ghost lingered, whispering that something didn't add up. The mystery wasn't just what happened to Christine. It was why the story kept changing. What followed was not an investigation, so much as a theater of accusation. Police officials rushed to the microphones with a certainty that evaporated almost as quickly as it appeared. Within hours, they labeled the case a rape slay. Within days, they backtracked, muttering about aneurysms and natural causes. The story mutated so violently it gave the public whiplash. The suspects, mostly Christine's male companions that night, became both villains and scapegoats. Their faces splashed across television screens, names trended online, reputations shredded before any formal charge was proven. Some insisted they were gay men, incapable of harming Christine in the way rumors suggested. Others claimed they left the room earlier, or that they tried to help her when she collapsed. Each statement contradicted another, forming a knot of testimony so tangled it was easier for public to choose sides than to search for consistency. The autopsy loomed like a cursed manuscript. The first report declared aneurysm. The second hinted at trauma. Analysts online pored over leaked details, debating medical terminology as if Twitter had turned into a pathology classroom. Why the bruises? Why the scratches? Were they from attempts to revive her? Or from something darker, something deliberately left unsaid? Theories bred theories. One corner of the internet spun a narrative of foul play. Christine drugged, violated, abandoned by supposed friends who tried to stage a rescue only when it was too late. Another camp clung to the aneurysm explanation, a freak, tragic coincidence misinterpreted by hysteria. A third whispered about cover-ups, powerful connections shielding the guilty. But the strangest part wasn't the theories themselves. It was the speed with which they became cultural ammunition. Christine's case became a Rorschach test for a nation's anxieties. Women's safety, machismo culture, corrupt policing, the hunger of social media for blood and scandal. Each side claimed Christine as their symbol, while the actual evidence drowned under noise. Even the hotel, a backdrop meant to symbolize luxury and escape, became suspect. People asked, why was security so lax? Why did it take so long for staff to respond? How many blind spots did the CCTV conveniently have? The building itself seemed to conspire against clarity, as if it swallowed the truth and left only fragments behind. The investigation should have revealed a straight line from cause to effect. Instead, it unfolded like a hall of mirrors. Every testimony reflected a different version of the night. Every document contradicted the last. Christine's story had too many authors, and none of them seemed interested in telling the truth, only in surviving it. The case was already a circus, but then came the implosion, the moment the investigation collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Authorities had paraded Christine's so-called friends before cameras like trophies, branding them suspects before evidence had time to cool. It was a show of force meant to appease public outrage. But when the dust settled, the accusations crumbled. No airtight evidence, no consistent forensic findings, no unified timeline. Just noise. The suspects walked free, technically uncharged, but their reputations executed in the court of public opinion. Imagine being branded a monster overnight, your face viral, your name synonymous with violence, and then being quietly told by the state, actually never mind. It's justice by spectacle, punishment without trial. Meanwhile, Christine's family felt betrayed twice over. First by the men they believed abandoned her, then by the institutions supposed to protect her memory. One day they were promised answers. The next, they were handed contradictions. Aneurysm, assault, natural causes, suspicious bruises. Each phrase left dangling, unresolved, like the government itself couldn't decide what story it wanted to tell. This was the breaking point. Public faith in the case evaporated. Christine's death was no longer simply a question of what happened. It became a symbol of systemic collapse. A police force so desperate for control it fumbled the investigation. A justice system so fractured it could not distinguish between rumor and fact. And if you listened closely, you could hear the narrative shift. No longer was Christine the central focus. She became background noise to a louder question. What does this say about us? About how women are treated? About how truth is handled? About how quickly lives can be destroyed in the crossfire of incompetence and spectacle? The breakdown wasn't just institutional. It was existential. The very act of searching for truth had become corrupted, evidence twisted, suspects scapegoated, grief weaponized. And in that chaos, Christine's voice, her last calls, her final hours, was drowned out entirely. The turning point in this story isn't a revelation of guilt. It's the revelation that the system itself might be incapable of telling the truth. That's when the case stops being a mystery and becomes something darker, a mirror reflecting not what happened in that hotel room, but what happens every time justice is treated like a stage play. The official record eventually settled on a neat explanation. Christine died of a ruptured aortic aneurysm, a medical fluke, a cruel coincidence. Case closed. That's what the papers said. Anyway, but outside the paperwork, nothing was closed. Her family rejected the finding, insisting the bruises, the timeline, the strange behavior of her companions pointed to something more sinister. They demanded a second autopsy, a deeper probe, a real explanation that didn't sound like a bureaucrat's shrug. But the more they pushed, the more the case dissolved into static. Evidence seemed to vanish. Testimonies contradicted themselves, and the state wobbled between defending its story and quietly letting the case die in silence. The lingering questions piled up like stones on a grave. Why did no one call for help sooner? Why was Christine's body move around before being rushed to the hospital? Why did official statements flip so violently? Foul play one day, natural death the next. And perhaps most haunting of all, if Christine really died from an aneurysm, why did so many around her behave like men rehearsing alibis rather than friends witnessing a tragedy? The word closure was thrown around like a bad joke. Closure implies an ending, a sense of peace. But Christine's case never offered that. Instead, it left an unfinished symphony. Notes cut off mid-bar, lyrics unsung. The truth was out there, but buried under noise, mistakes, and the heavy hand of a system too fractured to carry it. And so the resolution became non-resolution. The public split into camps. Those who accepted the aneurysm explanation as cruel fate, and those who whispered that Christine was robbed of justice. Both sides stared at the same set of facts, yet saw entirely different stories. In the end, Christine's death wasn't simply a tragedy. It was a lesson in how easily stories are rewritten, how fragile truth becomes once institutions fail. The case reaches official conclusion, but the questions linger like smoke, seeping through every retelling. If a young woman can die in a hotel room surrounded by friends and still leave behind a story no one can agree on, what chance does anyone have at a clean ending? Christine's name refused to fade. Even after the headlines quieted, her story clung to the collective consciousness like a stain that won't wash out. Hashtags flared up every anniversary, each one a reminder that the country had never truly decided what happened to her. She became a kind of cultural ghost, not the vengeful specter of folklore, but a modern haunting. Her face endlessly shared, her story endlessly debated, her memory repurposed for agendas far beyond her control. The case forced conversations a nation wasn't ready for, about how women are treated when they step outside the role society assigns them, about how quickly institutions lurch to judgment, and how slowly they backtrack when proven wrong, about the violence not just of acts committed, but of narratives imposed. Christine's body may have been laid to rest, but her story was picked apart and consumed until nothing of her privacy remained. Her family carried the heaviest burden. Grief was not enough. They were forced into advocacy, fighting for clarity, for dignity, for something resembling justice. Every interview, every press conference was another reopening of the wound, and the men once branded as suspects, they carried their own scars. Cleared, yes, but never really absolved in the eyes of the internet. Their names remained tagged to the case forever, ghosted by accusation. Even the institutions involved, police, hospitals, hotels, could not escape unscathed. The mishandling of evidence and the clumsy press briefings became case studies in failure. The incident fueled distrust in authorities, reinforcing a belief many Filipinos already held: that truth is fragile, justice arbitrary, and reputation disposable. But perhaps Christine's greatest legacy is this: she became a reminder that tragedy in the digital age is never private. Death does not end a story. It launches into endless circulation, endlessly interpreted, endlessly exploited. The hotel room became a national stage, her final hours replayed, her image weaponized. And somewhere beneath the noise was Christine herself, a daughter, a friend, a flight attendant, reduced to hashtags and speculation. Her story lingers because it refuses to resolve, like turbulence mid-flight. It reminds us how suddenly the ground can vanish beneath your feet, how quickly safety can prove to be an illusion. There's a cruel poetry in Christine's story. A flight attendant, a symbol of safety, composure, and escape, dies not in the sky, but in a hotel room meant to shelter her from the chaos outside. And instead of peace, she becomes turbulence incarnate. Her name tossed about, her story rewritten, her image dragged across every platform like a banner nobody asked to carry. What unsettles me most is how quickly truth became optional. Institutions tried to anchor her death with neat words like aneurysm, but the public pulled in the opposite direction, demanding villains, demanding retribution. And caught in the middle with Christine herself, her body dissected not just by forensics, but by gossip, outrage, and culture wars. She was no longer a person. She was a battleground. The irony is unbearable. Christine lived a life measured in departures and arrivals, guiding strangers through turbulence. Yet in death, she was denied her own arrival at clarity. Her story lands nowhere, trapped in an endless holding pattern, circling between natural tragedy and sinister suspicion. No runway, no closure, just loops. And maybe that's the real horror. Not just that Christine died young, not just that justice fractured, but that in our hunger for answers, we consumed her. We turned the daughter into data, a victim into a debate, a smile into a symbol. The case doesn't leave you with resolution. It leaves you with a question that gnaws at the edges of sleep. When truth is so fragile, what hope do any of us have of being remembered for who we really were, and not just the story others tell about us? Christine's legacy is not in the cause of her death. It's in the silence that follows when the noise dies down, when you realize the only person who could truly tell the story that night, the woman at the center of it all, will never speak again. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.